I'm Cassandra Walsh, 33 years old, and invisible at my own sister's anniversary party. When Heather raised her champagne flute and thanked our beaming parents for the blessing of growing up as an only child, something inside me finally snapped. The expensive property deed gift sat heavy in my purse as guests laughed and applauded around me. 28 years of erasure crystallized into perfect clarity. Tonight, I would end the charade. Tonight, I would make them see me, even if it was for the last time. If you're watching this and have ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me as I reveal how one decisive moment changed everything. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent Boston suburb where success wasn't just expected, it was the baseline. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn and marble countertops projected the perfect family image my parents so carefully cultivated. From the beginning, the roles were clearly defined. Heather, 3 years my senior, was the golden child. I was the afterthought. My earliest memory of understanding my place came on my 7th birthday. I'd been promised a small party with a handful of friends from school, nothing extravagant, just pizza and cake in the backyard. I'd hand-drawn invitations and had been counting down the days. The morning of my birthday, I bounded downstairs in my favorite purple pajamas only to find my mother frantically gathering her things. "Hurry and get dressed, Cassandra," she said without looking up. "Heather's dance recital starts in an hour, and we can't be late. She has the opening solo." "But what about my party?" I asked, my small voice already knowing the answer. My father walked past, carrying Heather's costume bag. "We'll have to reschedule. This recital is important for your sister's development. You understand, don't you, sport?" The party was never rescheduled. My friends showed up to an empty house while we sat in an auditorium watching Heather pirouette. When I cried that night, my mother told me I was being selfish for not supporting my sister's talents. School only widened the gap between us. Heather excelled in every subject, bringing home straight A's and glowing teacher comments. I struggled with reading and writing, the letters jumbling and swimming before my eyes. Years later, I would learn I had dyslexia, but at the time, my parents saw only laziness and lack of effort. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I brought home a C+ after studying harder than I ever had, my father barely glanced at it. "Heather was already taking advanced classes at your age," he said. My mother added, "Maybe if you spent less time doodling and more time studying." Those doodles were my salvation. While words confused me, images made perfect sense. I could express through art what I couldn't through language. But my parents saw no value in it. When my elementary art teacher, Mrs. Finch, called to tell them about my exceptional artistic promise, my mother thanked her politely and immediately registered me for extra math tutoring instead. Heather, meanwhile, had mastered the art of maintaining her status. She was clever about it, always sweetly concerned about my struggles, in front of our parents while systematically undermining me when they weren't looking. She'd move my homework, so I'd be frantically searching for it the next morning. She'd tell neighborhood kids not to play with me because I was weird and slow. When I tried to tell our parents, she'd turn those large blue eyes on them and say, "Cassandra just doesn't like that I'm doing better than her. She makes up stories." They always believed her. The only people who seemed to see me were my mother's younger sister, Aunt Renee, and her husband, Uncle Timothy. They lived about an hour away and visited monthly. Aunt Renee would bring art supplies hidden in her tote bag, our little secret, and Uncle Timothy would sit with me, patiently helping me work through reading exercises without making me feel stupid. "You have a unique mind, Cassandra," he'd tell me while Heather performed piano pieces for our parents in the living room. "You see the world differently, and that's a gift, not a flaw." I was 10 when I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I'd always suspected. My mother was chatting with our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, in the kitchen while I sat reading in the window seat, hidden by the curtains. "Margaret, how do you do it all?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "2 children, your charity work, and everything always so perfect." My mother laughed lightly. "Well, To be honest, it's like I'm raising one perfect child and one disappointment. Heather makes everything worthwhile. National Junior Honor Society at 12. But Cassandra,
She sighed.
we've tried everything. Some children just don't have what it takes. I sat frozen behind that curtain, a book I was struggling through clutched in my hands as my mother continued listing my deficiencies. That night, I began building walls around my heart. I learned to expect nothing, to become as invisible as they already seemed to think I was. I retreated into my sketchbooks, creating worlds where I mattered, where someone saw me. By 12, I had perfected the art of emotional absence. I could sit at the dinner table while my parents extolled Heather's latest accomplishment, nodding and smiling at appropriate intervals while my mind wandered through imaginary museums displaying my work. I learned to need nothing, to ask for nothing, to expect nothing. It was safer that way. The summer before middle school, Aunt Renee took me to an art exhibition in Boston. Standing before a massive abstract canvas, colors swirling and crashing together, I felt something click into place. "I want to do that," I whispered. "You will," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "And I'll be in the front row at your first gallery opening." For the first time, someone believed in my future. It was enough to keep me going, even as I returned home to the familiar shadows. By 15, the distance between my family and me had grown into an unbridgeable chasm. High school brought new social hierarchies, but the one within our home remained unchanged. Heather, now 18 and preparing for college, had blossomed into everything my parents valued. Academically gifted, socially adept, conventionally beautiful. I had grown too, but in directions my family couldn't comprehend. My art had evolved from simple sketches to complex mixed media pieces that explored themes of identity and belonging. My art teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Barnes, became my champion, encouraging me to enter competitions and apply for special programs. Under her guidance, I secured a spot in the school's first student art exhibition. For weeks, I worked on my centerpiece, a large-scale self-portrait using fragmented mirror pieces, torn photographs, and bold acrylic strokes. The day before the exhibition, I left it drying in the garage, our unofficial studio space since my parents refused to waste the spare bedroom on my hobby when Heather needed it for SAT prep. That evening, Heather wandered into the garage while I was upstairs. When I returned, she was standing over my artwork, an empty paint can tipped on its side, my canvas splattered with thick black enamel. "Oh my God," she gasped with rehearsed horror when she saw me. "I was just looking for Dad's tennis racket, and I bumped into your easel." "I'm so sorry." Hours of work destroyed in seconds. The exhibition was the next day, and there was no time to create something new. When my parents came to investigate the commotion, they were quick to assign blame. "You should have put it somewhere safer," my father said. "It was an accident," my mother added. "Don't be so dramatic, Mrs. Barnes helped me salvage what we could, incorporating the damage into a new narrative about destruction and resilience. The piece won honorable mention, but my parents didn't attend the exhibition. They were touring colleges with Heather that weekend. My 16th birthday fell on a Saturday that spring. I woke up to an empty house and a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to visit Dartmouth with Heather. Lasagna in the fridge. Back Sunday night." They had forgotten. Again. I spent my sweet 16 alone in my room, painting until my fingers cramped. Aunt Renee called that evening, outraged when she realized my parents had left. She and Uncle Timothy drove down the next day, took me out for belated birthday lunch, and gave me my first professional set of acrylic paints. "Your mother was always like this," Aunt Renee confided as we sat in a cafe. "Even as children, she needed to be the center of attention. Now she lives vicariously through Heather." "Why doesn't she see me?" I asked, the question that had haunted me my entire life. "Because you remind her of what she could have been if she'd had the courage to follow her own path instead of the one prescribed for her," she said, squeezing my hand. "Your authenticity is threatening to people who've built their lives on appearances." School became another battleground. Heather, before leaving for Dartmouth, made sure to poison the well. She'd found my private journal, pages filled with poetry, sketches, and raw teenage emotions, and shared selected passages with her friends who still attended my high school. Suddenly, personal thoughts about crushes, insecurities, and family frustrations became public knowledge. The isolation led to my first severe depression. I stopped eating regularly, my grades slipped further, and I withdrew from what few social connections I had. When my English teacher contacted my parents with concerns, they dismissed it as attention-seeking behavior. Heather never went through phases like this, my mother complained during a tense dinner. Why do you insist on making everything so difficult? Once again, it was Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy who intervened. They arranged for me to see a therapist, Dr. Natalie Parker, paying for the sessions themselves after my parents refused. We're not spending money to indulge her melodrama, my father had declared. Dr. Parker was the first person to suggest I might have dyslexia and arranged for testing that confirmed it. This revelation should have changed how my family saw my academic struggles, but instead, my mother said, "Well, now you have an excuse for everything, don't you?" Art remained my sanctuary. Despite everything, I submitted a portfolio to the Regional Youth Arts Competition and won first place in the mixed media category. The award ceremony was on a Thursday evening. My parents had tickets, but texted an hour before to say they couldn't make it. Heather had called from college with important news about her summer internship, and they needed to discuss it. I accepted my award before a crowd of strangers, Mrs. Barnes and my aunt and uncle the only ones applauding for me. My high school graduation ceremony marked the final fracture. After years of accommodations for my dyslexia and countless hours of additional work, I graduated with a 3.4 GPA, not exceptional by my parents' standards, but an achievement I was proud of. They attended the ceremony but left immediately after, missing my art program's special recognition because Heather had just been accepted to Dartmouth's prestigious graduate program and they needed to celebrate properly. That summer, I made my decision. With Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy's support, both emotional and financial, I applied and was accepted to the California College of Arts, clear across the country for my family. When I announced my plans at dinner, my father frowned. "That's not a real degree, Cassandra. What kind of job will you get?" "We're not paying for you to doodle for 4 years, my mother added. "I have scholarships," I said. "And Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy are helping with the rest." "Of course they are," my mother sniffed. "Renee always did encourage your impracticality." 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to San Francisco, my entire life packed into 2 suitcases. As the aircraft lifted off, I pressed my forehead against the window and felt the weight of expectations and disappointments recede with the Boston skyline. For the first time, I was flying towards something rather than away. Landing in San Francisco felt like stepping into color after a lifetime of grayscale. The California College of Arts campus sprawled before me, a collection of industrial buildings repurposed for creative exploration, nothing like the staid brick structures of New England academia. For once, I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking up space. My parents' involvement in my college journey consisted of a perfunctory drop-off at the airport and a check for $500, for emergencies only, my father emphasized. Meanwhile, Heather's graduate school apartment had been fully furnished by our parents, complete with monthly allowance deposits. The disparity no longer surprised me. What did surprise me was the immediate sense of belonging I felt among other art students. My roommate, Jessica Reynolds, was a vibrant photography major from Portland who didn't bat an eye at my dyslexia or quiet demeanor. "Different brains make different art," she shrugged when I hesitantly explained my learning disability. "That's what makes the world interesting." Within weeks, I found myself part of a tight-knit study group. Zach, a sculpture major with sleeve tattoos and a booming laugh. Kimberly, a soft-spoken digital arts genius. Marcus, who turned everyday objects into provocative installations. And Riley, whose fashion designs challenged gender norms. None of them cared about my GPA or compared me to an overachieving sibling. They cared about my perspective, my technique, my creative voice. Professor Diana Wallace, who taught my foundation drawing course, was the first instructor to truly recognize my potential. After class one day, she kept me behind to discuss my portfolio. "You have a unique visual language, Cassandra," she said, carefully examining my work. "There's emotional intelligence here that can't be taught. But you hold back at crucial moments, see here and here?" She pointed to areas where my lines grew tentative. "Something is blocking your full expression." That conversation led to Diana becoming my faculty mentor, guiding my artistic development and encouraging me to use art to process my family dynamics rather than compartmentalizing them. Meanwhile, Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy remained my emotional anchors. Unlike my parents, who called rarely and spoke mostly about Heather's achievements, my aunt and uncle sent weekly care packages containing art supplies, handwritten letters, and occasionally, homemade cookies. Our Sunday phone calls became rituals of validation and genuine interest. "Tell me about your new project," Aunt Renee would ask, and then listen intently as I described conceptual details most family members would find tedious. Uncle Timothy regularly sent articles about successful artists and creative entrepreneurs. "This could be you," he'd scrawl in the margins. "Keep going." When my parents did call, the conversation invariably circled back to Heather. "Your sister just presented her research at a graduate symposium," my mother would gush, not bothering to ask about my own studies. "Professor Whitmore says she could be published before she graduates." I learned to end these calls quickly, protecting the fragile sense of self-worth I was building. Dr. Amanda Chen, the therapist I started seeing at the college counseling center, helped me recognize these patterns and establish healthier boundaries. "Your parents have created a narrative where Heather is the protagonist and you're a supporting character," Dr. Chen explained during one session. "But you're the protagonist of your own life, Cassandra. You get to write your own story." My junior year marked a turning point. For my mid-year project, I created an installation titled Erasure, a series of family portraits where one figure, representing me, was progressively obscured through various artistic techniques, blurring, fading, physical cutting, until in the final piece, only a silhouette remained, filled with vivid, chaotic color that contrasted with the muted tones of the remaining figures. The installation received critical acclaim from faculty and was selected for the college's prestigious annual exhibition. Local art blogs covered the show, with one critic writing, "Walsh's Erasure confronts family mythology with unflinching honesty, transforming personal invisibility into powerful presence." I sent my parents the article link. My mother replied with a text, "Glad your hobby is going well. Did you see Heather was quoted in the Boston Globe regarding her economic research?" That same year, I met David Morales in a color theory workshop. He was a graphic design major with kind eyes and a quick wit who actually listened when I spoke. Our first date stretched from coffee into dinner into a midnight walk along the bay, talking about everything from artistic influences to childhood memories. When I hesitantly shared snippets of my family dynamic, he didn't dismiss or minimize my experience. "That sounds incredibly painful," he said simply. "And it says everything about them and nothing about your worth." David became my first serious relationship, introducing me to what healthy attachment felt like. He came to every one of my exhibitions, proudly explaining my artistic intentions to other attendees. He helped me recognize when I was self-sabotaging due to ingrained beliefs about my inadequacy. Most importantly, he showed me that love shouldn't require constant achievement or performance. By senior year, I had built a chosen family that provided what my biological one never had: unconditional support, genuine interest, and celebration of my authentic self. My graduation exhibition, a multimedia exploration of belonging and chosen connections, drew significant attention from local galleries. My parents did not attend my graduation ceremony. My mother called the night before. "Your father has an important client meeting, and I've already committed to chairing Heather's department fundraiser. You understand, don't you? It's just an art degree, after all." I did understand, all too clearly. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, the cheers from Aunt Renee, Uncle Timothy, Jessica, David, and my other friends drowned out the absence of my parents. The following week, a small envelope arrived containing a $25 gift card to a chain restaurant and a generic "Congratulations, graduate" card signed Mom and Dad. 2 months earlier, they had gifted Heather a new car for completing her master's program. After graduation, I secured a position at a boutique design firm in San Francisco while building my freelance portfolio. My independence was both financial and emotional. I limited visits home to major holidays, each trip reinforcing my decision to maintain distance. During one Thanksgiving dinner, I attempted reconciliation by sharing news of my first solo illustration project for a major publishing house. "That's nice, dear," my mother said distractedly, before turning to Heather. "Now tell everyone about your promotion." I looked around the table, at my father's proud smile directed at my sister, at my mother's hand resting affectionately on Heather's arm, at Heather's practiced modesty as she launched into her story, and finally accepted what Dr. Chun had been helping me understand. This dynamic would never change because they didn't want it to change. Their family narrative required my diminishment to maintain its structure. I excused myself, stepped into the backyard, and called David. "I'm done trying," I whispered as holiday laughter filtered through the closed door behind me. "Then be done," he said gently. "You've given them enough chances to see you." That night marked my last attempt at conventional family relations. I would still show up at required events, but I stopped expecting anything different. Instead, I poured my energy into building a life filled with people who celebrated rather than diminished me. At 27, my career trajectory took an unexpected upward turn. After 4 years at the San Francisco design firm, where I had risen to senior designer despite being younger than most of my colleagues, I received an offer to become creative director at a prestigious Seattle-based digital media company. The position came with a substantial salary increase, creative control over major projects, and an opportunity to build my own team. This professional validation coincided with another significant change: meeting Nathan Brooks. Unlike David, who had been a fellow artist, Nathan came from the tech world. We met at a charity auction where one of my pieces was being sold to benefit arts education. He outbid everyone else, then sought me out afterward not to discuss the artwork, but to ask about the story behind it. "I could feel there was a narrative in those brushstrokes," he said. "I'd like to hear it if you're willing to share." Our relationship developed with refreshing emotional honesty. On our third date, I explained my family situation, bracing for the usual platitudes about how family is everything, or suggestions that they must love you in their own way. Instead, Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like they've failed at the most basic parental responsibility, making their child feel valued," he said. "That's on them, not you." His straightforward acknowledgement of my experience without trying to reframe it or find silver linings was revolutionary. Nathan had healthy relationships with his own parents and sister, which initially made me anxious. Would he expect me to fix things with my family to fit his norm? But instead provided a useful contrast. Seeing how my parents treated my sister and me equally, even though we're completely different people, helps me understand just how abnormal your situation was, he said. "You deserved better." 6 months into our relationship, life took another unexpected turn. Aunt Renee called one evening, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "I've been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer," she said. "The doctors are optimistic, but the treatment plan is aggressive. 6 months of chemotherapy, followed by surgery and radiation." I was on a plane to Boston the next day. Uncle Timothy met me at the airport, the worry lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever seen them. "She didn't want to worry you," he said as we drove to their home in Cambridge. "But I told her you'd never forgive us if we kept this from you." "Of course I wouldn't," I said, reaching for his hand. "You two are my real family." The next 6 months became a balancing act. I negotiated a remote work arrangement with my company, splitting my time between Seattle and Boston. When in Boston, I stayed with Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy, accompanying her to chemotherapy appointments, researching clinical trials, and managing her medication schedule. My parents visited Aunt Renee exactly twice during her 6 months of chemotherapy. My mother claimed her charity committee obligations made regular visits impossible. My father cited important business meetings. Meanwhile, Heather sent a flower arrangement with a card promising prayers, but never appeared in person. Your sister is very busy with her new position, my mother explained defensively when I pointedly asked about Heather's absence during a rare phone call. Not everyone can just abandon their responsibilities. The contrast between their minimal involvement with Aunt Renee and my complete restructuring of my life to support her wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Aunt Renee herself. You know, she said one afternoon as I helped her back to bed after a particularly brutal treatment session, your mother and I grew up in the same house, but we might as well have been raised on different planets. She learned to value appearance over substance, status over character. I'm so proud that you took the harder road, choosing authenticity even when it cost you their approval. During this period, another family event loomed. Heather's engagement to Gregory Williams, a wealthy investment banker from a socially prominent Boston family. The engagement party was scheduled for a weekend when Aunt Renee had a critical follow-up scan, giving me the perfect excuse to decline the invitation. But it's your sister's engagement, my mother insisted during a tense phone call. Surely Renee would understand if you missed just one appointment. I'm not missing it, I said firmly. Aunt Renee has been there for every important moment of my life. I'm doing the same for her. The wedding invitation arrived 3 months later, an elaborate affair with tissue paper inserts and gold embossing. When I checked the seating chart at the reception, I discovered I'd been placed at a table with my parents' distant acquaintances rather than at the family table. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was a guest, not family. I attended alone, Nathan having a critical project deadline he couldn't miss. After the ceremony, I watched my father present Heather and Gregory with an envelope. Later, Heather excitedly told a group of bridesmaids it contained a check for $50,000 as a wedding gift. I thought about my college graduation gift, a $25 gift card, and something hard and clear crystallized in my chest. The inequality wasn't just in my head or a result of my sensitivity. It was deliberate, consistent, and undeniable. Aunt Renee's cancer went into remission that fall, a victory we celebrated with a small dinner party at their Cambridge home. As we sat in their garden, the evening light filtering through the maple trees, she took my hand. This experience has clarified what matters, she said. And one thing I've realized is that I've been too accommodating of your mother's treatment of you. I kept hoping she'd change, that she'd see what she was throwing away. But Cassandra, you need to know that you don't have to keep accepting scraps from their table. You deserve a full plate. I know, I said quietly. I'm learning to set boundaries. Good, she nodded. Because diminishing yourself to make them comfortable isn't helping anyone, least of all you. 2 weeks after returning to Seattle, I opened an email from the Seattle Arts Commission. My application for their annual Emerging Artists Showcase had been accepted. The exhibition would feature my new series exploring family mythology and personal narrative through large-scale, mixed-media works. The opening night was a career milestone. Gallery owners, critics, and collectors filled the space, engaging deeply with my work. Nathan stood proudly by my side, occasionally squeezing my hand when the conversations became overwhelming. Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy flew in for the event, Aunt Renee's hair just beginning to grow back in soft gray wisps after her treatments. I had sent invitations to my parents and Heather, more out of formality than expectation. They didn't attend, didn't call, didn't acknowledge the event in any way. The following month, the New York Times Style magazine featured a full-page spread on my work, describing it as a visceral exploration of absence and presence, interrogating the spaces between familial obligation and personal truth. When Aunt Renee called to congratulate me, she mentioned that my mother had seen the article. She was at her book club when someone brought it up, Aunt Renee reported. Apparently, she changed the subject immediately. Even national recognition couldn't penetrate the narrative my parents had constructed. In their story, my achievements didn't exist because they didn't fit the predetermined script. I was the disappointment, the afterthought, the less than. No amount of external validation could change that for them. But something had changed for me. I no longer needed their validation. My worth wasn't determined by their ability to see it. I had built a life filled with meaningful work, authentic relationships, and chosen family who celebrated my whole self, not despite my differences, but because of them. As Nathan and I walked home from dinner one night, discussing plans to move in together, I realized I felt something unfamiliar: contentment. Not the desperate happiness I'd once chased, hoping it would finally make my parents notice me, but a quiet, steady satisfaction with the life I'd created on my own terms. "You're smiling," Nathan observed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "I just realized something," I said. "I'm happy. Not because anything extraordinary happened today, but because my ordinary life feels good." He squeezed my hand. "That's not ordinary at all. That's extraordinary." The thick cream envelope arrived on a Tuesday, my name and address written in my mother's precise handwriting. Inside was a formal invitation to Heather and Gregory's 10th anniversary celebration, a weekend-long affair at the Blackwell Country Club, Boston's most exclusive venue. I stared at the gilded card, running my finger over the embossed lettering. A decade had passed since their wedding. In that time, I had spoken to my sister perhaps a dozen times, mostly brief exchanges during holiday gatherings I occasionally still attended. Our conversations never progressed beyond surface pleasantries. "Are you going to go?" Nathan asked that evening as we sat on our apartment balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, the invitation propped against a wine bottle between us. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks it's just another opportunity to be reminded of where I stand in the family hierarchy." "And the other part?" I sighed, watching a ferry glide across the darkening water. "The other part still hopes for some kind of resolution, I guess." "Stupid, right?" Nathan took my hand. "Not stupid. Human. Just know what you're walking into so you can protect yourself." The next day, I discussed the invitation with Dr. Kimberly Foster, the therapist I'd been seeing since moving to Seattle. "What's your goal if you attend?" she asked, her calm voice a counterpoint to my swirling emotions. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Closure, maybe? Or perhaps I'm still that little girl hoping her parents will finally see her." "Those are very different goals," Dr. Foster pointed out. "One accepts reality as it is. The other hopes for a change that may never come." The decision crystallized when Aunt Renee called later that week. "Your mother mentioned the anniversary party during our last call," she said. "Did she tell you about the gift they're giving Heather and Gregory?" "No, what gift?" "They're signing over the Cape Cod property to them. The beachfront house they bought as an investment 5 years ago. It's worth at least $1.2 million now. The property had been my grandfather's retirement project, a modest beach house he'd renovated himself. After his death, it had gone to my mother, who with my father had torn it down and built a modern vacation home they rarely used. I had spent summers there as a child, finding solace in the rhythmic crash of waves when family dynamics became too overwhelming. "That's quite a gift." I managed my throat tight. "I thought you should know what you're walking into," Aunt Renee said gently. "Your mother made it sound like a coronation ceremony rather than an anniversary party." After our call, I sat at my studio window for a long time, watching the Seattle rain trace patterns on the glass. The magnitude of the gift didn't surprise me. My parents had always been extravagant with Heather. What caught me off guard was the property choice. That house held my few positive childhood memories. Now it would be Heather's, another piece of family history rewritten to exclude me. "I'll go," I told Nathan that night. "But I'm going with clear eyes. No expectations, no hoping for different outcomes. Just acknowledgement of what is." He studied me carefully. "Are you sure? We could plan a trip instead. Maybe that artist retreat in New Mexico you've been interested in." "I'm sure," I said with newfound certainty. "I need to do this for myself. But I think I'll go alone. Having you there would give them another target, and this is my battle to finish." The weeks before the party were filled with practical preparations. I booked a hotel room instead of staying at my parents' house. I found an appropriately elegant outfit, a slate blue dress that conveyed professional success without trying too hard. I arranged my work schedule to accommodate the 3-day trip. The emotional preparation was more complex. With Dr. Foster's guidance, I developed strategies for maintaining boundaries and managing triggers. I rehearsed neutral responses to predictable slights. Most importantly, I clarified my intentions. I would attend not to seek approval, but to honor my own journey. Think of yourself as an anthropologist, Dr. Foster suggested. You're observing family dynamics with scientific detachment, not as a participant hoping for different results. The night before my flight to Boston, Nathan helped me pack, his concerned eyes following my movements. "Remember, you can call me anytime," he said. "And if it gets to be too much, you have permission to leave early. Your mental health matters more than social obligations." I landed in Boston on a crisp autumn afternoon, the familiar skyline both welcoming and alienating. My rental car carried me through neighborhoods filled with memories. Past my elementary school, the ice cream shop where I'd celebrated rare achievements, the park where I'd sketched for hours to avoid going home. The hotel provided a necessary buffer, a neutral territory where I could decompress between family engagements. I had arranged to meet my parents for dinner that first evening, a prelude to the weekend's festivities. The restaurant they chose exemplified their preferences: expensive, traditional, known more for its clientele than its cuisine. My mother air-kissed my cheeks upon arrival, my father offered a brief handshake, and within minutes, the conversation turned to Heather. "The anniversary celebration will be covered by Boston Magazine," my mother announced, signaling the waiter for more wine. Gregory's position at the firm merits the attention, of course, and Heather's nonprofit work with disadvantaged children makes them the perfect power couple. For 2 hours, I listened to detailed accounts of Heather's accomplishments, Gregory's business acumen, and the social significance of their anniversary celebration. When I mentioned receiving a significant public arts commission to design installations for Seattle's new library system, my mother nodded distractedly. "How nice," she said, before turning to my father. "Richard, did you tell Cassandra about Heather's fundraising gala? She single-handedly raised $2 million for children's literacy." The irony of my sister, who had watched me struggle with undiagnosed dyslexia without intervention, being celebrated for literacy advocacy, wasn't lost on me. But I maintained my composure, sipping water and nodding at appropriate intervals. The next morning brought brunch with extended family at my parents' home. Cousin Ella immediately pulled me aside, her voice low. "Fair warning, Aunt Margaret has been talking about Heather nonstop for weeks. It's the Heather show, as usual." I squeezed her hand gratefully. Ella had been one of the few relatives who recognized the family dynamic for what it was. As children, she had witnessed my exclusion during family gatherings and occasionally slipped me encouraging notes or shared her dessert when mine mysteriously disappeared. The brunch unfolded predictably. My mother paraded Heather and Gregory around important family connections while I made small talk with distant relatives who barely remembered my name. When Uncle Timothy and Aunt Renee arrived, they made a beeline for me, creating a momentary safe harbor. "How are you holding up?" Uncle Timothy asked, his kind eyes assessing. "I'm fine," I assured him. "Just observing, not absorbing." Aunt Renee squeezed my arm. "Your grandfather would be turning in his grave knowing that Beach House is going to Heather. He always said you were the only one who appreciated its magic." As if summoned by the mention of the property, my mother appeared, champagne flute in hand. "Cassandra, do join the family photo by the garden. The photographer is waiting." The family photo positioned me at the far edge, easily croppable for future reproductions. Heather stood center, flanked by our beaming parents, while Gregory charmed everyone with practiced anecdotes about their perfect marriage. Later, as guests mingled on the terrace, I overheard my mother describing the anniversary gift to her friend Judith. "We're presenting them with a deed tomorrow night, during the celebration. It's perfect timing. They've been talking about wanting a vacation home where their children can experience summers like Heather had." The property that should have been shared between both daughters would now belong solely to Heather, another erasure of my place in the family. The familiar hollow feeling expanded in my chest, but alongside it grew something new: resolve. That night in my hotel room, I received a text from Aunt Renee. "Remember, your worth isn't determined by them. Stay strong tomorrow. We love you." I slept fitfully, dreaming of beach houses with doors that wouldn't open for me and family portraits where my face blurred upon examination. Morning came with a sense of clarity. Today would be different. Today, I would no longer accept invisibility as my inheritance. The Blackwell Country Club stood as a monument to old Boston money, all ivy-covered brick, manicured lawns, and understated opulence. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms whisked away luxury vehicles, while string quartet music drifted through open French doors. I smoothed the front of my slate blue dress, checked that the elegantly wrapped package was secure in my clutch, and made my way up the granite steps. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a celebration of Heather and Gregory's decade of matrimony. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements in cream and gold. A professional photographer circulated among the 200 guests, capturing candid moments of Boston's elite in their evening finery. "Name, please?" asked a tuxedoed attendant at the entrance, clipboard in hand. "Cassandra Walsh," I replied, watching as he scanned the list.
"Ah, yes.
Table 23. He gestured toward the far corner of the ballroom, near the kitchen doors. Table 23, I would soon discover, hosted my father's former administrative assistant, my mother's second cousin's husband, and 3 couples I had never met, all equally distant from the family's inner circle. The family tables, numbers 1 through 5, surrounded the dance floor and head table where Heather and Gregory would preside. My mother intercepted me before I could reach my assigned seat. "Cassandra, you're here," she said, as if mildly surprised I had honored my RSVP. "The blue is interesting." Her gaze flicked dismissively over my designer dress, the most expensive piece of clothing I owned. "Heather and Gregory are circulating. Do say hello before they get pulled away by the Prescotts. Senator Prescott is considering Gregory for his Economic Advisory Committee." Before I could respond, she was gone, moving to greet more socially significant guests. I made my way to table 23, introducing myself to my tablemates, who seemed equally confused by their placement in the Siberia of seating arrangements. "I'm Cassandra, Heather's sister," I explained to an elderly couple who peered at me with puzzled expressions.
"Oh."
"We didn't realize she had a sister," the woman said, genuinely surprised. "Margaret and Richard never mention another daughter." I smiled tightly. "Yes, I hear that a lot." As dinner service began, my parents took the stage to welcome guests. My father, distinguished in his tuxedo, beamed with paternal pride. 10 years ago, we welcomed Gregory into our family, though it feels like he's always been part of our lives. Heather was our perfect daughter, and Gregory proved himself the perfect match. My mother nodded in agreement. Watching Heather grow from our brilliant little girl into the accomplished woman and community leader she is today has been our greatest joy. "Gregory, thank you for being the husband she deserves and for giving us 2 beautiful grandchildren to spoil." Their grandchildren, Eliza, 8, and James, 6, sat at the family table in matching outfits, coached to perfection for their role in the celebration. I had met them exactly 3 times, each interaction supervised by Heather, as if she feared I might somehow contaminate them with my artistic tendencies. After dinner came the gift presentation. My father tapped his crystal glass, calling for attention. As many of you know, Heather spent idyllic summers at our family's Cape Cod property, building memories that shaped her into the person she is today. Margaret, and I can think of no better anniversary gift than ensuring those same experiences for Heather and Gregory's children. With theatrical flourish, my mother produced an elegant box tied with gold ribbon. Inside it, I knew, lay the deed to the beach house worth over $1 million. The property that held my only peaceful childhood memories, now being publicly handed to my sister who had rarely even visited it, preferring summer camps and European vacations. To Heather and Gregory, my father continued, raising his champagne flute, may this home shelter your family and create generations of happy memories. Applause erupted across the ballroom. The property deed gift box was placed ceremoniously at Heather's table, directly across from where I sat alone, my tablemates having migrated to the dance floor. Then came Heather's toast. Rising gracefully, glass in hand. She surveyed the admiring crowd. "Gregory and I are overwhelmed by your generosity," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "This evening celebrates not just our marriage, but the values that shaped me. Mom and Dad, thank you for giving me the greatest gift a child could ask for. The blessing of growing up as an only child, with your undivided attention and unconditional support." The room rippled with appreciative laughter. My parents beamed, clapping enthusiastically at what they clearly considered a charming joke rather than a cruel erasure of my existence. In that moment, something broke and reformed within me. 28 years of invisibility crystallized into perfect clarity. This wasn't carelessness or oversight. It was deliberate excision from the family narrative. My sister hadn't misspoken. She had given voice to the reality they had constructed and maintained, a family of 3, not 4. With steady hands, I reached for my clutch and extracted the small package I had brought, an envelope containing a copy of the acceptance letter for the prestigious Harrington Fellowship I had recently been awarded, a national recognition of my artistic contributions. I had foolishly thought they might finally be proud. Instead, I found myself drawing out my phone and typing a quick message to Aunt Renee. "I'm doing it. Tonight. Are you sure about this?" Her reply came seconds later. "Absolutely sure. It's time." I excused myself from the table and walked to the ladies' room, where I made a brief call. Then I returned to the ballroom, where dessert was being served and guests were beginning to loosen their ties and kick off uncomfortable shoes as the celebration shifted into its more relaxed phase. As I approached my table, I noticed the deed box had been moved temporarily to an elegant side table to make room for the elaborate anniversary cake. It sat there, wrapped in gold ribbon, a physical manifestation of everything I had been denied. With the certainty of someone who has nothing left to lose, I picked up the box and moved toward the microphone that had been set up for guests to offer anniversary wishes. The DJ, seeing my approach, automatically dimmed the music, drawing all eyes in my direction. Standing at the center of the room that had been designed to showcase my sister's perfect life, I felt a strange calm descend. This was the moment when I would finally claim my voice. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. "For those who don't know me, I'm Cassandra Walsh, Heather's sister." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. At the head table, Heather's smile froze, and my mother half rose from her seat before my father pulled her back down, his expression darkening. "First, I'd like to congratulate Heather and Gregory on 10 years of marriage," I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "It's quite an achievement." The confused murmur subsided as guests settled in for what they assumed would be a conventional toast. At the head table, Heather maintained her frozen smile, while my mother's eyes darted nervously between me and the property deed box in my hands. "I've been thinking about family legacies tonight," I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "About what we inherit and what we pass on. About the stories families tell themselves and which members get written out of those stories." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. This was not the generic congratulatory speech guests had expected. My father's face hardened into the stern expression I knew so well, while my mother's fingers gripped her napkin with white-knuckle intensity. "For those of you who seem surprised to learn Heather has a sister, I don't blame you. I've been systematically erased from the family narrative for most of my life." I paused, looking directly at my parents. When Heather thanked our parents for raising her as an only child, she wasn't joking. She was acknowledging the reality they created. Uncomfortable glances were exchanged across tables. Gregory whispered something urgently to Heather, who shook her head slightly, her practiced poise beginning to crack. "Did you know that when I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 15, my parents refused to pay for educational support, calling it indulging my melodrama? Or that they skipped my college graduation because Heather had received a summer internship offer the same day? Or that my high school art award, a national recognition, received a $25 gift card as congratulations, while Heather's graduate school acceptance was celebrated with a new car?" My mother stood abruptly. "Cassandra, this is hardly the time or place." Actually, Margaret, I said, using her first name deliberately, this is exactly the time and place. You've spent decades crafting a public narrative that excludes me. It seems fitting to correct the record publicly as well. I held up the deed box. This property holds my only positive childhood memories, sketching on the beach while everyone else was busy praising Heather's sandcastles. I spent more time there than anyone, finding refuge when home became unbearable. And now, without a second thought, you're giving it solely to Heather. Another clear message about who matters in this family. My father stood now too, his authoritative voice cutting across the room. That's enough, Cassandra. You're embarrassing yourself and this family. No, Richard, I replied with quiet dignity. You've been embarrassing yourselves for years by treating one child as treasured and the other as disposable. The truly sad part is that you don't even see it. I opened the deed box and removed the document inside. I've made a decision tonight. I'm redirecting this gift to the two people who actually behaved like family to me, Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy. Gasps rippled through the audience. My parents surged forward, but the distance across the ballroom gave me precious seconds. Legally, once this property is gifted to me, I can do whatever I want with it, I explained, looking around at the shocked faces. And what I want is for it to fund art scholarships for students with learning disabilities who, like me, might otherwise fall through the cracks. You can't do this, my mother hissed, reaching the microphone area. That property isn't yours to give away. Actually it is, said a calm voice from the entrance. Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy stood there, alongside a distinguished older man I recognized as Walter Harrington, my parents' longtime attorney. We've just filed the transfer paperwork that Richard and Margaret signed last week. The property belongs to Cassandra now. My father's face paled. Walter, there must be some mistake.
No mistake, Richard, Walter replied.
You signed the Cape property over to Cassandra as a tax strategy, remember? The anniversary announcement was to be symbolic only. Legally, the property transferred to her name 3 days ago. The revelation struck my parents like a physical blow. In their haste to minimize estate taxes, they had followed their financial advisor's recommendation to transfer assets to both daughters. They had planned to give Heather the deed ceremonially tonight, then have me sign it back over to her tomorrow, a detail they hadn't bothered to discuss with me, assuming my compliance, as they always had. I've already signed my portion over to the Walsh Caldwell Arts Education Foundation, I continued, referring to Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy's surname. The foundation will maintain the property, using rental income to fund scholarships. The first recipient has already been selected, a 16-year-old dyslexic sculptor from South Boston. Heather finally found her voice, rising to stand beside our parents. You can't do this to me, she said, her polished veneer cracking to reveal the entitlement beneath. That house is supposed to be mine. It's always been promised to me. Just like everything else, I said quietly. But not this time, Heather. Not this time. I handed the signed documents to Uncle Timothy, who had approached with Aunt Renee. Around us, guests watched in stunned silence, the elaborate anniversary celebration derailed by decades of family dysfunction laid bare. I'm sorry for disrupting your anniversary, I said to Gregory, who alone among the immediate family looked more thoughtful than outraged. But I'm not sorry for finally speaking my truth. My mother grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. If you leave this room with that deed, you are no longer my daughter, she hissed, low enough that only those closest could hear. I gently removed her hand. I've never really been your daughter, Margaret. We're just finally acknowledging it. With that, I turned and walked toward the exit, Aunt Renee and Uncle Timothy falling into step beside me. Behind us, chaos erupted. My father arguing with Walter, my mother collapsing dramatically into a chair, Heather demanding that someone fix this immediately. But I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from the narrative they had created and toward one of my own making. The weight of decades of invisibility lifted with each step, replaced by the unfamiliar lightness of authenticity. Outside in the cool evening air, Aunt Renee enveloped me in a fierce hug. I am so proud of you, she whispered. So, incredibly proud. Uncle Timothy squeezed my shoulder. Your grandfather would have stood and applauded. He always said you had more courage than the rest of us combined. The three of us drove away from the Blackwell Country Club, leaving behind the wreckage of a carefully constructed family mythology. By morning, the Boston social circles would be buzzing with revised narratives, uncomfortable questions, and reassessments of the Walsh family dynamic. But I wouldn't be there to witness it. My flight back to Seattle left early the next morning, carrying me back to Nathan, to my thriving career, and to the chosen family who had seen me all along. 6 months later, the first scholarship recipient, a girl named Maya with brilliant spatial intelligence and severe dyslexia, sent me a thank you letter along with photographs of her award-winning sculpture. Because of you, she wrote, I know that my learning difference isn't a deficit, but a different way of seeing the world. I framed her letter and hung it in my studio, a reminder that sometimes shattering silence creates space for new voices to emerge. The Beach House, now managed by the Foundation, hosts summer art intensives for students with learning disabilities, its walls filled with their creations rather than family photographs that excluded me. My parents attempted legal action to reverse the property transfer but abandoned the effort when their attorney explained the potential public relations disaster. They haven't contacted me since that night. Heather sent one email, filled with accusations and self-pity, which I didn't answer. Aunt Renee calls it the Great Reckoning, the moment when decades of carefully maintained family fiction collapsed under the weight of truth. Some families, she told me recently, can only function when certain members accept diminishment. By refusing to be diminished anymore, you forced a recalibration that was long overdue. Looking back on that night, I don't regret my actions, only that they were necessary. In an ideal world, parents would love their children equally while celebrating their differences. Siblings would support rather than sabotage each other. Families would make space for everyone's authentic self. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in this one, where sometimes the bravest thing we can do is shatter decades of silence with one decisive act, creating space to build something new from the fragments. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up against family expectations to be true to yourself? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of self-reclamation and healing. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for witnessing my story, and may you find the courage to speak your own truth when the moment calls for it.